You may have been to casinos at some point in your life, but do you really know the truth behind the game you're playing?
And the casinos were very polemic or very controversial when they came out. But the truth was, that's all the federal government gave us. They didn't allow us to go into a lot of businesses simply because the way our credit was restricted, we couldn't invest in others. Now, I'm Cherokee. My children are Cherokee, my mom's Cherokee, and so I'm part of the Cherokee tribe. So growing up in Oklahoma in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that was before gaming began. So there were very few scholarships available. I didn't get a single dime for being Cherokee. All we really had was commodity cheeses, USDA surplus that was made available. It's basically like the WIC program that was available for Native Americans, and we qualified economically. So growing up in Indian country was, back when I was a kid, was healthcare at a clinic where you sit and wait in line for a very long time until you finally get, your whole day is gone. You take grandma there and you sit and sit and sit. And then you could have commodity cheese, powdered milk, USDA cornflakes, cooking oil, some very basics, and that was about it. That was it. And then because my mom was very interested in culture, she would take us on vacations, and often we would go to Tahlequah to see the Trail of Tears. And so we get a little bit of sample of culture.
The Trail of Tears occurred in 1830 after the Indian Removal Act was passed by President Andrew Jackson. Tribes traveled as much as 5,000 miles over land and water.
Most of the tribes are here. In fact, I think all the tribes that are here were moved from somewhere else. The Modocs came from California or the West Coast. Cherokees came from North Carolina, Georgia, into Oklahoma. And all of them, the Potawatomis came from Chicago, then came to Kansas, and then came to Oklahoma. All of them call it Trail of Tears, Trail of Sorrow, Trail of Death. So it was a sad time to come to Oklahoma. How incredibly important are the tribes to the state of Oklahoma? They are the reason Oklahoma exists.
There are 39 tribes in Oklahoma today, but only 5 are indigenous, meaning they are specifically native to the state. Before being called indigenous, the 5 tribes were referred to as the 5 civilized tribes. They were the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Seminole, and Creek, or more commonly known as the Muskogee.
Tribes are part of the community. Their history and their culture is bound up in the history and the culture of the state of Oklahoma. And when we work together, we have better roads, better entertainment, better opportunities, and a better state. And that always, regardless of the community, when you work together, collaborate, and communicate, you're always going to have a better system.
But this opportunity did not come immediately for the tribes. They would continue to encounter setbacks, the biggest of which would potentially be the Oklahoma Land Rush of 1889. Approximately 50,000 settlers showed up to race across the plains of Oklahoma, hoping to get their own share of the 2 million acres being given away by then-President Benjamin Harrison. However, the land had already been promised to the natives.
You have Irish who were coming over from Ireland after the great potato famine, and they just wanted land so they could build their own future. They had no idea that the land had been taken from the natives and given them to run across and take again. So they had no idea that they were participating in a land grab. They were just grateful for the opportunity to be somewhere where they could build something with their own hands. The black community around the United States was hoping that Oklahoma would become an all-black state. One of the first statewide elected officials was a black man. And there are a lot of traditionally black towns here in Oklahoma because of the hope that Oklahoma gave that this would be a place where we could be free. This was a place where we could build something for our families that would be secure. And so the tribes were already here. They were promised that if you go to Oklahoma, you'll be safe. And then all of a sudden there's a land run where we told the Irish, if you come over here, you can build something. And then the black community around the United States, where they were wanting to come. So in my district, there is Brooksville, Oklahoma, traditionally black town, Bowlegs, Boley. There's a number around the state. So we have a rich history in our own melting pot within a melting pot. And what was the common denominator was people who just desired to be free from oppression or free to build something of their own.
Over the next 140 years, the tribes would face both social and economic hardships. It wasn't until President Ronald Reagan signed a piece of legislation that would allow the tribes to return to a self-regulated economy.
So, I can't speak to Reagan's involvement, but I believe he probably was president at the time, because Daniel Inouye from Hawaii, Democrat senator from Hawaii, he was, I believe, a Medal of Honor winner. He was a decorated World War II veteran. He's the one that crafted the Indian gaming and made it available. And quite frankly, a lot of the tribes were opposed to it when it came out. But at the end of the day, they said, do you want to continue with nothing, or do you want to take what the federal government has given you? And that's all they gave us.
Well, gaming came about in the early years in the Butterworth case, Seminole case, and then led into Cabazon, but it's bingo. What is referred to as Class 2, the Class 2 is bingo, but the tribes in the 70s and 80s started running bingo halls. Small ones that grew. In 1983, I started at Otoe, Missouri, when I was at Oklahoma State, and it could house between 4,000 and 6,000 bingo players. They brought in 129 buses on average for the first 2 years I worked for them, from around 27 states to play high stakes bingo. So we went from small bingo halls to high stakes bingo. And if you look at the history and read all the stuff during the 80s especially, there's always that reference to high stakes bingo. So as that grew, like I said, Otoe, Missouri did that at Otoeplex back in the day, at Red Rock, Oklahoma. And then you had other properties starting to do that. They weren't running, they would probably sit 2,000 to 3,000 people on a weekend. You could get that easy. Otoeplex, when the Otoes did it, they ran every other weekend and pulled in those crowds from those areas. Filled up all the local towns, Enid, Ponca City, anywhere that there were hotels, motels, were filled up. So it even then it showed that it was a boom to the local economy.
Bingo came in where it was actually a cash-based game. We started getting more revenue in. And then with the Indian Gaming Act, we were able to start investing in casinos across Indian country. And then the cash began to really flow. And there was enough cash flow to actually start investing in things that the tribe really wanted.
All of a sudden, tribes ran bingo halls, and all of a sudden they started to have this influx of cash. Maybe $100,000, $200,000 a year. May not sound like a lot, but it's a whole lot of money when you can decide how you spend it. No one else decides it. But for the tribes, it was good. It didn't make them rich. I mean, you had a lot of expenses. Like anything else, you're playing out big prizes. You're using a management company usually to run them, so they're getting their share. But tribes were getting more money than they ever had before, and it wasn't federal dollars. Federal dollars is mandated by certain standards and criteria that you have to follow. So in other words, you have X number of dollars, you can only spend it X way. So when the tribes finally started getting their gaming money and stuff, and they could spend it how they wanted.
Initially, they would you could compact with the states. If the state agreed and you made a compact with a revenue share of some kind, then as long as the state agreed, then you could have gaming enterprises. So it started with bingo. And then here in Oklahoma, with the compacts negotiated under Governor Henry and the Democrat-controlled legislature at that time, both House and Senate, they had a compact where they shared certain revenue streams from the casinos, and they could only have Class 2 gaming. And Class 2 gaming was deemed to be a little less addictive, perhaps. So there was a lot of negotiating with different stakeholders in Oklahoma. And so they had to figure out a way to determine what was Class 2 and what was Class 3.
And I use that word Class 3 because in Oklahoma it's often been said, if you look at the compact, they're still bingo-based, Bonanza, UPICOM based criteria. So there's often been the argument that it's a Class 2.5 compact.
On March 10th, 2004, Governor Brad Henry signed a gaming compact to legalize electronic bonanza-style bingo games, electronic amusement games, electronic instant bingo games, and non-house banked bingo games. This became State Question 712 on the November 2, 2004 Oklahoma ballot. It was voted on by the people of the state of Oklahoma and passed, establishing a model tribal gaming compact.
The Supreme Court ruled, and it's called Cabazon, and it said, very, very important, tribes could participate in gaming if it was civil, regulatory versus criminally prohibitory. Very important. So if the state allowed bingo, such as California, where the case originated from, tribes could do it. If the state allows what became Class 3 gaming, in other words, any gambling deal, they would be allowed to do it. Now, that's what the court ruled on, and then Congress created the act itself and the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. And so therefore, under that, they set up the definition of Class 1, Indian social games, okay? 2, Class 2, bingo related. And Class 3, primarily slot machines and stuff, games that possess the elements of prize, chance, and consideration. Those are what constitutes gambling, if you will. Some would argue that bingo has that, and that's correct. Bingo does have those elements, but by the fact that Congress said Class 2 is Class 2, that's what it is. It's like any contract. If the definition is defined in that, that's how it reads. So Class 3 is primarily slot machines, roulette, dice, anything to that effect that has those three elements of price, chance, and consideration fall under that category.
The difference with you've seen the roulette wheel with the ball that goes around. You see them in movies, and then it gets in a black or a red, and then if you pick the right number, okay, so that's a Class 3, right? And so they can't have that roulette wheel because that's a Class 3. But so what they did is instead they got a roulette wheel and revamped it and put poker cards, and it would go around like you put a poker card in your bicycle spoke and it going brrr, that's how so it's almost identical game except there was no ball. And so there was like the less chance was involved, and it kind of separate between Class 2 and Class 3. And again, that's not my expertise. But so they had to work their way through what does that look like, and then they adapted their casinos to it. And a lot of the games now are not mechanical but electronic. And so inside that was mathematical formulas and algorithms that adhered to the Class 2 versus the Class 3.
So that's how that all about. That was the explosion in the 80s, and then in the 90s you started seeing tribes getting compacts, and then you seen tribes like Oklahoma, and we didn't get compacts. We were battling an uphill battle. But technology, if you read the act itself and also the Senate Report 555, it talked about the use of technology and what it meant, what it was, and that's communication satellites. Phone lines, all types of things. When you read that, the manufacturers, of course, are geniuses, right? They started utilizing and putting that technology together, and they came up with an electronic version of bingo. And boom, you have an explosion.
It's created cash flow in Indian country for tribes to actually start investing in themselves. And when I say investing in themselves, it's like language programs, scholarships, buildings, programs, daycares, expanding WIC, women and infants and children. And so a lot of these programs would not be possible if it weren't for the casinos. And so again, gaming had to be compacted with the states according to the federal regulation that authorized it, and then the compacts had to be made with the states that they resided in. And so Oklahoma agreed to, made a deal with the tribes, and we've had casinos popping up ever since.
You see a large portion of every tribe utilize their money for education. That's the only way we're going to be self-sustaining, is to educate our people. Well, I mean, for me personally, I didn't make a lot of money working for the tribe, but when we were making money and we were doing the education funds, I have 3 children. they all received their undergraduate degrees. The tribe paid a portion of their tuition. And I paid the fees, which we were familiar with that. And then and I was in a position that I didn't think I could help originally, going in and always telling my children that, we'll do what we can do, and then you guys are going to have to take out student loans or whatever. Things worked out pretty good that tribe covers the tuition and part of the fees, and my girls got some scholarships that paid for the other part of their tuition, and so it put a position where I just paid their room and board. I mean, I couldn't have done it other ways. But the difference is my kids that walked away with no student loans.
So I don't have the statistics, but a tremendous amount of revenue have come into Oklahoma as a result of the casinos that have popped up, because often it's the only business in town because they're in these rural areas. Now the Chickasaw Nation have their Thackerville Casino, which is just across the border from Texas. When you go through their parking lot, it's Oklahoma, Texas, 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 Oklahoma, Texas, 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 Kansas, Texas, Texas, Texas. And so it is bringing in tremendous of out-of-state revenue into that local economy, so much so that they've got an amazing interchange of highways. They have one of the, I think, the largest casino under one roof on the planet.
Windstor Casino is owned by the Chickasaw Nation and has roughly 600,000 square feet of dedicated gambling space, making it the world's largest casino. It contributed massively to the Chickasaw Nation, posting a net revenue of $1.4 billion for the fiscal year of 2017.
Those casinos created a cascading opportunity effect with the revenue that came in and the ancillary businesses that grew up around those casinos. It has a tremendous impact. And you can see it reflected in a robust language program, health clinics, even hospitals. The Cherokee Nation's built a huge hospital in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. The Potawatomi Nation, they have 2 clinics. One's on I-40 just west of the Grand Casino. The other one is between Shawnee and Tecumseh, Oklahoma. So all of these, so we have doctors who come in and work in the clinics. We have a radio station that's there in Shawnee. So all of that would not have been possible without the additional revenue flow from those casinos. Traditionally, Native Americans have had difficulty in getting access to capital. And so that's what CDFIs do, is provide access to capital. And what I would tell them is say, look, gaming may not be around forever. The state of Oklahoma might do a compact with non-natives, or we may saturate the market. What are you going to do to make sure that your economy doesn't collapse? And so what I was urging tribes to do is invest in your small businesses so that you have a robust, diverse economy, so that we're not just dependent on gaming in Indian country like we were just dependent on oil in the state of Oklahoma, right? We need to have that diversity, so if anything comes that disrupts the economy, we can survive.
What started as a very controversial idea for both sides ended up with a considerable gain for the tribes and the local economies. Native Americans have a unique opportunity to bring in business that not many other places can offer because of the demand for gaming in America. This leads to more money being spent not only at casinos, but at surrounding businesses, thus increasing the economy of the tribes. Though there are tribes and reservations that still experience dependency on the government, many tribes have a better economy and more money than they ever have in the past. And that is the truth behind the game.